Right, and Miss Kelly, you can go ahead and get started. I know as we start starting, people are gonna start trickling in a little over time, but here I'm gonna start recording any minute and start recording. And all right, thank you, Miss Kelly. We appreciate having you on today. It's been a great pleasure. Been following your stuff for a little bit, but I want to kind of give it to you and to, have you speak on your topic and your experience and your background and give us a little bit more about your skill sets and value. And we appreciate having you on tonight.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to share with you all. And so, yeah, as I get started, I'll talk a little bit about my background and what I do and what my company does, just for a little bit of context. But definitely, if at any point anybody has any questions about the topics, I know sometimes I was telling Christian earlier, I can get a little bit dry. Feel free to shout out, ask questions. And I'd be happy to have this be more of a dialogue than just me talking at you all. So please feel free as we go through to yeah, to come off a mute and have a conversation. So today, what I wanted to talk about and what I was asked to speak on was CMMC and Fedramp compliance. And I know these are, big acronyms that are going around right now, big compliance programs, and can sometimes be seen as, quite cumbersome and scary for organizations that aren't familiar with them. But there is a lot of importance around why they were created and a lot of work that will be coming up. The CMMC program is just now really getting started, even though it was initiated kind of back in 2019. So I think it's something we're going to be hearing more and more about in the coming years. So I wanted to give you guys, hopefully, my goal is to give you a foundation for what these programs are, why they exist, and kind of different roles you could play in helping organizations go through these programs if that's something that you're interested in. So a little bit of background on myself. I am Kelly Hood. I'm EVP and Cybersecurity Engineer at Optic Cyber Solutions. I did co-found the company back in 2019. So if you have any questions about that also, I'd be happy to address those. Feel free to shout out. So a little bit of background just about Optic. We are a services company. So we work with companies to do cybersecurity assessments, implementation support, and advising. And we really try to focus. We know that cybersecurity is not everybody's primary business objective, unfortunately. That's what we like to do, but we know other companies have to do other things. And, they might work in the healthcare industry or, finance or retail, and they're trying to, sell products off the shelf or, care for patients, and cybersecurity often gets in the way. So what we try to do is figure out how to build that into their business and to what they're doing day by day. So it doesn't harm what they're trying to do, but just helps them to succeed better. And so that's one of our main focuses at Optic and what we do. And we also spend a lot of time as we work with companies across sectors. One of the primary pillars of the work we're doing right now is around CMMC, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. And for that, we have a long history of my team has worked in, we'll call it government, either government directly or government adjacent space where we work for government contractors, specifically DoD, doing assessments. So we work with a lot of companies helping to advise them on how to get started with CMMC, how to do readiness assessments. We have been an RPO, registered practitioner organization, if you're familiar with the lingo already. So we have gone through that process. We actually helped to co-author the Certified CMMC Professional Field Exam Guide for one of the LTPs. And we've been doing this for a long time and working to support assessments. So again, we have a lot of experience with CMMC as the program is getting started. We've been following it since it was initiated, and even with the 171 requirements back beforehand, but I won't get into the weeds too much there. So again, if you have any questions, let me know. I will very easily go too far into the weeds. So if you need to pull me out, we can do that. But as we get started, I wanted to just kind of found the conversation on CMMC itself. What is it? Why do we care? Why is it here? What was its purpose? And really, the CMMC, it's a DoD framework for protecting the DIB. It stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and it was developed to help safeguard sensitive national security information. I mentioned a moment ago that there were requirements from NIST SP 800-171 that have been mandated to be put in place for any company working for the DoD back since 2017. But there were a lot of, we started hearing from whistleblowers and people in the community, and just seeing all of the information that was, sensitive information that was cropping up around the world, that the U.S. sensitive information was getting out. So CMMC was built to establish a trust but verify approach for managing cybersecurity. The requirements largely were already developed and mandated back in 2017. This new certification is really just that verification piece and saying, now we're going to test you on it. We're going to certify that you're actually meeting these requirements that you've been attesting to for years. And it's applicable to all DoD contractors and suppliers, and that does include subcontractors.
Good
Yes, I see a
question.
question.
Yep. So just a good question for you. So you guys have a lot of relationships with a lot of these contractors, DoD. What is really your approach with getting with these contractors? I mean, how do you guys start? Say you guys have a new client, potential client that wants to go through some type of assessment through you guys. What is your guys' approach in starting this process with them?
Yeah, so I guess from getting started, the company getting started to get certified, is that what you?
Yeah, yeah, to get certified through you guys through the assessments. Do you
Yeah,
guys?
so really one of the biggest things and one of the biggest challenges is figuring out, what is their CMMC environment? What sensitive data do they have? The certification is for protecting controlled unclassified information and federal contract information, which I have on another slide later, so I won't get too far into that. But it's all about figuring out what part of our organization needs to get certified so that we can define the requirements and make sure we have the requirements in place on those systems, be able to communicate it to an assessor. So usually scoping is one of the biggest and hardest parts of the whole process.
Mhm. And that's what you say your duty and your responsibility specifically?
Yeah, so we help them to figure that out. We really, I guess, maybe more broadly, what we do is help navigate that process, knowing that this certification process is filled with acronyms that we'll see over the next hour,
Mhm.
and being able to help companies kind of break down, see what do I actually need to do, what's important. These requirements come out of the DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations, and
Mhm.
that is thick. Like there's a lot of information there. It's written in legalese, and being able to translate that and for companies to know what do I actually need to do. A lot of times we're kind of a translator and we help them to figure out how that applies for them.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, ask a question.
Yeah, I see a question.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly, for the session. Now, I'm looking into the third point, applicable to all DoD contractors and suppliers.
Mhm.
Now, where do I find a list of all those contractors for DoD? Is it available somewhere on the website of DoD? Where do we find that? So at least I'll know who are the contractors to DoD.
That's a good question. I know there is a lot of contract information that is publicly available. I'm not sure if there's a central repository of all of that. That would be something like if you were looking for your organization, you would need to talk to, if you have like a contract officer or somebody that manages proposals and awards, to see if there's any contracts that are with the Department of Defense and if that would apply to you. But I do know some of the contracts are sensitive, and so it's not all contracts are not publicly posted. In some cases, that is considered FCI, federal contract information, and so that wouldn't be shared necessarily. Yeah, sorry, kind of a little bit of a non-answer there is there's not necessarily one central place to look, to my knowledge
Uh,
at least.
yeah, great. So as a person who certify people or implement or advise the DoD contractors, like how do you get to know? I mean, how do those contractors comes to you?
How
So,
would you find
okay,
those DoD
yeah, how do you find
companies?
them? Yeah, how do you find them? How do they come to you? Like, what's the process usually you guys are doing or using?
Right. So I'd say there's a few different ways that we do that. One of them is through just word of mouth. I mean, we have been working in this industry for a while. And so once you know a few people, they start to tell other people, which is a great way whenever that can work for you. Specifically at Optic, we speak at a lot of different conferences and we attend a lot of conferences. So for the CMMC space, there's the Seek West conference coming up at the end of or mid-May out in Las Vegas that my co-founder is going to be speaking at and talking about SRMs, shared responsibility matrices, and how those should be documented at the CMMC conferences. So it's a great way to get in front of people to show that you're knowledgeable. We do a lot of posting and working with people on LinkedIn, sharing information as we find out, and basically demonstrating that we are knowledgeable in this field, and it helps to bring people in. I know a lot of other people do, outreach, and they'll find, whenever they can find a list of people, they'll send, emails and calls and things like that. And but we usually do a little bit more, of the LinkedIn, the conferences, and the networking with people that we know, going to events, either local, where I'm out of Maryland. So there's a lot of government contractors in the area or attending these conferences. I'm also speaking at a conference. It's actually an education-focused conference, EDUCAUSE. They have a cybersecurity and privacy conference in May on the topic of CMMC and getting ready.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the answer.
Great. So digging in a little bit here. So yeah, why CMMC? I did touch a little bit on, why it was created. It was developed to safeguard that sensitive information. We know that the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, has been the target of more and more frequent and complex cyber attacks. We're seeing, sensitive U.S. information show up in other countries. Different, we've seen the fighter jets show up that look, surprisingly like, aircraft that we have in the US. And how did that information get there? It got there because a lot of information was stolen from some of our some of our contractors in the US. And so we want to make sure that information is not getting out there, so we can keep our competitive edge and protect our military. So that's really why it was so important to build out this program, is not only implement the requirements, but make sure that the companies that have this sensitive information are protecting it in a way that was going to be sufficient. I mentioned that CMMC is building on those initial requirements that were there from SB 8 or 171, but now we have that trust but verify approach. So through doing that, CMMC established a tiered set of requirements based on the sensitivity of data that you have. And I've got a slide on that later. We can touch on the levels of maturity. And it does require the assessment to verify the implementation. And if you have any sensitive unclassified information, FCI or CUI, it is expected that you would have the certification upon award once the program is fully rolled out. So we'll get a little bit more into the FCI and CUI, but just a reminder, this is all unclassified information. If anybody or any company has classified information, that's a whole different ballgame. And then, as we mentioned, it is relevant for all DoD contractors and suppliers. So one thing we're seeing now is that even though the program isn't fully rolled out in contracts, we're seeing a lot of the large prime contractors reaching to their subs. The Northrop Grummons, the Lockheed, some of those really big defense contractors have hundreds of suppliers that work for them, that provides them, parts, data, tools for building out everything that they make. And those suppliers, those large contractors are now asking their suppliers and saying, well, how are you prepared for CMMC? So even though the requirement isn't showing up in contracts yet, from the DoD's perspective, we're seeing those large contractors asking their suppliers. So it's a very broad group of people that are now going to be required to implement these, but finding that central list of everybody is part of why it's so tough, because sometimes the primes don't even know who all the second and third tiered suppliers are, but that's what they're trying to work out now. So we are working on, the rulemaking is going through the program rule. I think my slide is just a little bit outdated here. The program rule 32 CFR went through in December. So the program now exists. You can get certified, but it's not showing up in contracts yet, but we are expecting that to come out any month now. This is just kind of a summary of everything I just said and what the program is and why it was created. So maybe I'll pause and see if there's any other questions. Yes, Kay.
So, Ms. Kelly, where is the focus on, the geographical focus on all those companies? Where do you find them? Is it like in the East Coast, West Coast? Where's the most demand right now?
That's a great question. I mean, there really is nationwide. I'm a little biased. I'm on the East Coast, so I do see a lot. We've got a lot of, I'm out of Maryland, so there's a lot of government agencies nearby. So we do see a lot of those contractors here on the East Coast. But I know also, like West Coast California, you look near any kind of military base, there's probably going to be a cluster of defense contractors there. So, I mean, really, we're working with organizations out of Illinois, Carolinas, Texas, California, Maryland. I mean, really across the country. So I couldn't say that it's concentrated in any one state or region. It really is nationwide, but you're going to see probably a higher concentration physically around like military bases and places where there are a lot of government agencies.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So next, I wanted to take a moment to talk about the data types that are relevant for CMMC, because this is one of those hard to answer questions, but it really is the crux of a lot of the challenges. Um, if you are a government contractor, a DoD contractor, and you don't have FCI, CUI, or critical CUI, then you don't need to meet the CMMC requirements. So that's one thing that's really important. But there are a lot of companies that have the CUI or some form of CUI that they process on behalf of the government, and that's what brings CMMC into play. And the government is supposed to tell you that, and it shows up in different forms when they do or don't. Sometimes they just put the DFARS clause in your contract whenever you sign it. So there's a lot of companies that we see that don't realize they need to meet the CMMC requirements. There's still a lot of companies that are real that don't recognize this as coming for them, because they haven't been told specifically you have CUI. It is this type of data. But that's something that we're trying to work through right now and getting some more transparency on. So if anybody, if you yourself are a DoD contractor, or if you are working with anybody that is, being able to identify those DoD contracts, what type of data you're processing on behalf of the government, and then label it, find out if it's what type of information it is, and if it has any special categories of CUI, starting those conversations early with contract officers is really important right now to figure out if this is applicable for you. Once we get into CMMC and you recognize that you do have sensitive data, what level that you would need to meet is based on the type of data that you have. So if all you have is FCI, that federal contract information, then you only need to meet level 1, and that's 15 requirements out of the FAR listed down here. If you do have CUI, then you need to be level 2. And if you have critical CUI, that's what level 3 is. And based on what level you need to be is what type of assessment that you would need to undergo. So if it's only FCI that you're processing, then you can do an annual self-assessment, and you'll need to attest that you're meeting the requirements, but you don't actually have to go through a third-party assessment. But for anybody that is an auditor in the room and looking to get into performing CMMC assessments, you'll probably want to look at the level 2 organizations they're looking to be level 2 certified because they have CUI. They're going to need to go through triennial C3PAO assessments. So that's the certified third-party assessment organizations, and there's a whole process for companies that go through that process and what they can do so that they can become C3PAOs to do those actual certification assessments. Kind of like the ISO auditors, you have to go through a process to be able to do those, the ISO audits. They need to go through additional qualifications to become C3PAOs. There are cases where if you have CUI, you don't have to go through that third-party assessment. You can just do an annual self-assessment. But with all the information that's out there, that's very few and far between. So I would not put all of my eggs in that basket. It's going to be most cases that if you have CUI, you need to have the third-party assessments. And then if anybody has the critical CUI, that would be actually the DIBCAC would have to come in and do their assessments every 3 years, and it adds on 24 additional requirements out of NIST SB 172. So it's just kind of a high-level overview of based on what data you have, what type of assessment you would need to undergo. But where we're seeing a lot of the churn right now is around this level 2 assessments. Companies that are realizing they have CUI, they need to get a third party in to evaluate what they have and become certified. So that's where when we're talking about CUI, when we're talking about CMMC, a lot of times people are talking about this level 2 because that's where that third party assessment comes in.
Good question.
Yeah.
Have you had to do a level 3 ever?
I have not worked with anybody level 3. There are, again, there are not very many organizations that are going to need to go through level 3. This is where they've got, yeah, that critical CUI. And yeah, I have not actually run into anybody that's been told they will need to go through a level 3 assessment.
So most common you'd say is level 2 nowadays.
Right. Level 2, yeah, is definitely most common. And a lot of people will try to do the level 1 requirements as a stepping stone to level 2 because the 15 that you're doing here at level 1 are included in the 110. So you can sometimes you can kind of get your feet under you, start with 15, and then move up and add on the additional 95 as you start level 2.
Thank you.
Yeah. So here I just wanted to give like a really high level overview of the domains for CMMC, the types of requirements. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the control catalogs that NIST puts out, like in NIST 853 or 800-171. This is based on NIST 800-171 and highlights the ones in the darker blue are which requirements or which domains are required for CMMC level 1. So they focus on things like access control, media protection, system communication protection, even physical. But you can see they're not all, some of them are grayed out. It's not until you get to level 2 that you have to do all 14 domains that are included in CMMC. So bringing in things like awareness and training and audit. So again, that's why some companies will start with level 1, address those 15 requirements, and then move up to looking at all of them. And even with all of them, one thing, I don't think I've included a slide here, but if you are working with either within your organization or looking at helping another organization get prepared for CMMC, the domains is the highest level. So we've got the domains that break into requirements, and then each requirement also has assessment objectives that a lot of people overlook. And it's really critical to look at those assessment objectives in preparation because they're assessment objective is exactly what your auditor, your assessor is going to be using as they evaluate what you're doing. So one of the things we do when we work with companies is we make sure that the organizations have answers to every assessment objective. They know exactly how they're meeting it. They know exactly, they've got it documented. They've got, they know how to get to the information to show the assessor that this is how they're meeting that requirement and that assessment objective. Because we've had multiple times where we've gone into work with a company and they say, we've got, our documentation, we're meeting all the requirements. And then you start going through those assessment objectives, and some of them have, 10 different objectives for meeting a single requirement. And they've only met 3 out of 10 of the assessment objectives because they didn't realize there was this other criteria. I've got a friend that jokes that the assessment objectives are like criteria for, his daughter cleaning his room. He said, my requirement is that my daughter cleans her room before she can watch TV. And so she'll tell me, oh, I finished cleaning my room because I, put the trash out. And he's like, no, to clean your room, you have to put the trash out. You got to make the bed. You got to pick up all the toys. I've got all this criteria, but if you don't know there's all that criteria there, then you're not going to get to watch TV. Now it's different with his daughter because she probably ought to know better by now. But in this case, it is really important to look all the way down at the assessment objective level for anybody that's looking to go through certification or helping somebody prepare for that. I also wanted to highlight here, these are the requirements that are currently in place today. This is really what CMMC was built on, that are already in the DFARS requiring that you're meeting the 171 requirements that CMMC is built on. So I won't walk through all the details here, but if anybody is, again, working with anybody, or if your company, if you think you need to go through CMMC and you have not met the 171 requirements, this might be a good slide to screenshot to go take back to your team to look at, because there are requirements in place already that you need to be meeting them. We just haven't had that verification requirement yet. It's just been that you're attesting that you're meeting them. And then looking at the rollout back to, I guess, thinking of kind of the community and how we'll see it roll out over the next few years. The program initially, started conversations about CMMC back in 2019, and they've been working on getting it up and running. I mentioned in December of 24, just a few months ago, is whenever they passed the program rule 32 CFR, and that's what codified that CMMC is now a thing. It's now in existence. You can go get certified against it. But as far as that showing up in DoD contracts and when those DoD contractors will start to care more, will happen over the next few years. So what we're expecting is that phase one will start this year in 2025, that they will start to roll out the level one assessments and the level two self-assessments. So, and this would just be so even companies that may need to get third-party certified later may only have to get a self-assessment for 2025, but then as we look towards 2026, they're going to roll out the L2 certification requirements. So it's going to start showing up in contracts and not just say you need to meet these requirements. You need to have a certificate from a C3PAO saying that you have met all these requirements. So that's 2026. 2027 is where they're going to roll out the L3 certifications. So that's part of why we haven't heard a whole lot about L3. It was after they had defined L1 and L2. They defined the L3 requirements at a later date even. We do know what those are now, but it's definitely been lagging behind L1 and L2. And then in 2028 is when the program will be fully live. Any DoD contractor will not have any excuse. The government won't hear any reasons around why they're not certified at that point. They're going to need it upon contract award. Yes. The other question?
Yeah, Ms. Kelly, I understood from what you're saying right now, CMMC is the certification, and they use the NIST 800 171 as a base for the requirements.
Mhm.
And but where does the DFARS fit in? Is it like the law or regulation you have to comply with as well? So you add it during your implementation process?
Yeah,
Is it something like
so
that?
yeah, the DFARS exactly. That's the law that says you have to do CMMC, because otherwise somebody would say you do CMMC and they say, no, I don't want to, that's hard. So the DFARS is where the requirement for CMMC is coming from. That is the way the government tells you this is an expectation that I have of you. So by meeting the CMMC requirements, you will be meeting those DFARS requirements. And there are a bunch of different clauses, like I had on that slide a few slides ago, requiring 171, and then it was the one back at the 32 CFR that was where it codified in law that CMMC is now a thing that you can be certified against. So you've got it exactly right. It is the DFARs are basically the law that now is something that there is a reason that we need to comply with these requirements.
Awesome. So I don't need to do an extra step like checking the law and figuring out what kind of points or requirements in there to add it on top of my CMMC.
Right. It's not like it's a separate set of requirements. I mean, the DFARS there are lots of, let me make sure I say this right. There are lots of requirements in the DFARS that anybody that's doing contract work with the Department of Defense, there's everything from, how to, about your contract specific to how to operate your business and different requirements for different things. But from a CMMC perspective, there's not like a separate list of cybersecurity requirements. There are some incident reporting requirements. But yeah, from CMMC, it kind of says you need to implement CMMC. It'll have some guidance. But then you'll want to look at the model and the requirements for the specifics from a cybersecurity perspective on what would need to be done.
Okay, so if I implement CMMC, I'm compliant with DFARS. I don't need to go and refer it. Unless the law says, let's say the notification of breach is, let's say, 48 hours. I don't know exactly how long. Let's say if it says that, so during my implementation of incident response plan, so I drafted, I have to put in inside like 48 hours. Is it something like that?
That is one example, but if I go back to this slide, like this is the DFARS are not cybersecurity specific. So that is just like the regulations, the federal, the defense acquisition requirements for doing work with the government. So these are some of the cybersecurity relevant requirements, but there are many, many other requirements. I mean, if you look at the numbering scheme here, 252, 204, 7012, there's 252 other minimum of 252 other requirements out there that have to do with things not necessarily related to cybersecurity. There are some, and that's where I was highlighting, like there, like around incident reporting and things like that. So, um, so I guess maybe from a CMMC perspective, I think that's accurate, but there are many, many other requirements in the DFARS that are not CMMC related. If that helps
So
provide any clarification.
yeah, so let me rephrase it once again. So I'll go and implement the 800, 171 to get certified by CMMC at a specific level. And in my, let's say one of the documents is like a legal register. So in that register, I'll put DFARS as regulatory stuff I have to comply with. I'll pick the cybersecurity related requirements. I put them in because of DFARS. Then I'll cascade them down into the policies which I'm building up, or the procedures which I have to do. Then I need to cascade them down on some tools. Is this right understanding?
I think so. I think that sounds more in alignment with there are other requirements out there that would need to be tracked and met. And that's where so many companies have gotten had issues over the previous 5 years or so before CMMC was created, is that there were these requirements about 252, 204, 7012, for example, around incident reporting and even here where it requires 171, that it was in the DFARS, but companies didn't know. I mean, they started doing work for the government. They said, yeah, sure, we're doing all that good stuff, but they didn't know there was this cybersecurity requirement that they needed to implement SB 800-171, and so they weren't doing it. So some of them, the requirements in the DFARS are varied, and some of them are very specific and some of them are very broad. I mean, this one requirement is telling you to go do 110 other things, inclusive of like access control. So, I would just want to make sure I'm not minimizing the DFARS here, is that could be a whole other talk and a whole other topic that I want to make sure I don't mislead anybody on. That's a large task on its own. But that is where the requirement for CMMC is included in the DFARS. So that's how CMMC gets its authority to need to be met, is that it is in the DFARS.
Good question.
Yeah.
Just the DFARS on a high level, what if you explain DFARS is to somebody that doesn't really understand? I know I've heard of it, I've seen it a lot. I just don't know specifically what its purpose is compared to CMMC, compared to Fedramp. What is it really specifically?
Right. So the DFARs are, and there's actually a FAR also. So there's the federal acquisition requirements, or it might be regulation. I can't remember the R is requirement or regulation. But there's the FAR, the federal acquisition requirement, so that any company doing business with the federal government has to meet. And then there's the specific supplement for the DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Requirement supplement. That's if you're doing work specifically for any agency in the DoD. So they're basically sets of requirements that contractors need to do if they're doing work for the government. And when I say a set of requirements, again, I mean, like, if you printed it off, it'd be this thick sitting on your desk of requirements written in legal terms telling you this is how you need to operate your business, this is what you need to do, everything from training requirements to how to specific financial requirements for your business. Cybersecurity is in there, but it's not a cybersecurity specific standard. It is like all encompassing of operations, and cybersecurity is just a piece of that. So it's a set of requirements that need to be met for doing business with the government, essentially.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then by getting contracts with the government, you are attesting that you're meeting the DFARS. And sometimes, companies should know that if they've gone through the process of, putting out, submitting to the proposals and all of that and getting it awarded by the government. But sometimes they don't realize all the requirements that are in there. Like I said, because it's that thick, especially for small businesses, that can be a real challenge.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, happy to clarify. So I guess back on the CMMC side for a moment, really, I think I've kind of made this point, but just to hammer it in, is that CMMC aims to build confidence that DoD sensitive data is being protected. So previously we had the requirement that you had secure operations. That's doing SB 171. But now we need to make sure that everybody's certification ready. They have the documentation around it. It's one thing to say, we have access controls. When a visitor comes into my building, I make sure they don't wander off and do bad things. But it's another thing to be able to prove it to an assessor that you did that last Tuesday when Bob came to the office for some reason and he brought a guest. So then they're gonna look for evidence. And that's one of the critical pieces about CMMC is that we need to have it written in an SSP. We need to have some kind of proof that they did it. That might be a visitor log in the case of that example. That we can look and see, oh, you've had people sign in and out when they leave the building, but they're going to be looking for some sort of evidence that the requirements are being met, not just somebody sitting there and saying, yes, we do that. Yes, we do that. And that can be where a lot of the challenge comes in as well, is being able to provide that proof that these requirements are being met. So I did also want to talk about Fedramp a little bit and what is it and what is it different than CMMC, because a lot of people right now are learning about Fedramp through CMMC, conversations about CMMC. But Fedramp is a completely different program. It is another, government-focused program, but it's focused on adoption of secure cloud services. So where CMMC is what companies, contractors will get certified, they'll get their environment certified that they're protecting that CUI properly so that they can do work for the government and store, process, or transmit CUI. FedRAMP is all about focusing on cloud service providers protecting data in the cloud, so that you as a contractor or as anybody, whenever you put your data in that cloud, you can trust that it's being protected. So it's a different entity being evaluated in these cases. So it was created because they recognized that there was a need for a cost-effective, risk-based approach for adoption, because what was happening is every time the government wanted to use a cloud service provider, they wanted to use, AWS, they wanted to use a GRC tool, that cloud service provider or that SaaS tool has to go get certified individually. And they had to go through a whole bunch of checks and a whole bunch of security requirements. And so somebody said, this is too much work. This is a lot. We're reassessing the same company every time. Everybody's using AWS. Can we just certify them once and make sure that we can all use them? And that's what FedRAMP does, is a company that goes through this. Now we know that they have this badge, that we can trust them, that we can now put our data in a FedRAMP authorized environment and know that it has a minimum level of protections. So it aims to protect the federal government against unauthorized activities and ensure that that data is protected in a sufficient way. Yes.
So, Ms. Kelly, let's say I am a company who help other contractors to get to implement CMMC, and then somebody else will come and do certification for it. Now, during the implementation, I'll go, let's say, to some kind of Excel sheet. I'll write the legal requirement. One is DFARS. The second one is FedRAMP. If I am a contractor, I'm a cloud provider. So basically, I'm a cloud provider, and I'm providing this service to DoD. So I have to be CMMC certified. And in this certification, I have to consider requirements of FedRAMP.
If you are a cloud service provider, you would have to consider FedRAMP because, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because CMMC, if you have CUI data and it's not in the cloud, but you're processing that CUI on behalf of the government, you would just need to be CMMC. But if you are putting that data in the cloud and you are using somebody like AWS or Azure, you would need to make sure, or some other third party, you would need to make sure that they have a FedRAMP authorization. Any CSPs are now, either you have to demonstrate that there is sufficient protection there that you are putting in place, or that service provider, that CSP, has to have a FedRAMP authorized environment. So that's why a lot of times the CMMC and FedRAMP are getting brought together, is because CMMC has requirements for CSPs to have FedRAMP.
So if I'm a company right now, I establish a company which is a cloud provider. Let's say an example, some competitor to Amazon and Google Cloud. and I
Mhm.
start building that up, and I'm a contractor to DoD. I have to be certified using CMMC, and I have to consider and I have to be authorized by Fedramp as well at the same time.
If you wanted to work with the government, yeah, you would have to be FedRAMP. If you did not have CUI, you wouldn't necessarily have to be CMMC. So I just want to
Okay.
highlight that they're,
But if
they
both,
are focused on different things. And actually, I do have a few slides that might help clarify. I have a few pictures because it's kind of nuanced. So maybe let me walk through this and we'll see if that helps. And we could definitely walk through the examples some more about why you would need one and what are the use cases.
but if both of them, definitely I need. If I have CUI and I'm a cloud provider, so basically I have to be both.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. And FedRAMP is built on the SP 853 controls, which is a larger control set than SP 800 171. SP 853 covers the full range of confidentiality, integrity, availability. Whenever 171 was created, it was basically a down select focused on the confidentiality controls. So SP 800 171 is a subset of 853. FedRAMP is built on 853, CMMC is built on 171. So again, there are overlaps between the requirements, but they are different control sets, just to muddy the water a little bit more.
Awesome. Thank you.
So here's in my scenario here. I wanted to kind of walk through why, when we talk about CMMC, when FedRAMP, and why it matters. So why does it matter if I'm working in the cloud? I am, company one. I have, my laptop. I have, my servers. I've got a firewall, and I have, some information of mine that I use in the cloud. That's easier for me to store it there. It's in a central place that I can get to from anywhere. I'm storing it in the cloud. Um, However, in a lot of cases, a lot of other people are also storing their data in that cloud, and that's kind of the whole point. But then we start to wonder, when we have, all of these different companies that have their data in the cloud, how can we make sure that company one doesn't get access to company three's data, or company four doesn't get access to company one's data? And that's really why FedRAMP came into place. We want to make sure that anything in the cloud cannot be accessed by people that shouldn't access it, because there are going to be other people there with you. Now, when we think about CMMC, we need to make, and we're looking at the data we have, that CUI, we're focused on protecting the data that we control in our CMMC environment. So that's definitely going to include things like the laptop that we process that on, the servers that we are, storing that data on, any routers that are transmitting, that are in between transmitting the information, the printer that I'm going to print out the hard copy of the CUI on. All of this is going to be in scope for my CMMC assessment because I've got CUI. But it also means, and this is the point we were making a moment ago, that even if I put it in the cloud, that now brings this cloud service provider into scope of my CMMC assessment. And that's where things get hairy. Because for some of the larger companies, like we mentioned, Amazon, Google, they've got the funds. A lot of them have already gone through FedRAMP, and so they already have their certification. Golden, that makes it easy. They can just tell us their certificate number, and we can write that in our CMMC package and say, I know I can trust my data that's there because they've gone through certification. Um, but if we are hosting, but if it's not certified, then we have to figure out how we're going to protect this data in the cloud, or else bring it back on-prem or bring it back in my CMMC environment. And that's a tricky conversation for a lot of companies that, want to be in the cloud for efficiency, for, resources, a way to maximize all of that. But even if it's in the cloud, it does fall in scope of the CMMC environment if we've got UI that's being stored, processed, or transmitted there. Because again, there might be other people, all of these other companies that are there with us, that can have other sensitive data. And again, we don't want anybody accessing anybody else's data. That gets really hairy really fast. But this can become burdensome for the cloud service providers, because if I'm this cloud service provider, say I'm a new company, I created the latest, greatest, best, sharing platform or way to access the data, And now I've got 5 different companies going through CMMC certification saying, I need you to be a part of my assessment. When my auditor comes, I need you to talk to them and to tell them about all your great security capabilities and your protections. This cloud service provider is going to say, yeah, company number one, but after 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 come to them, they say, I've got my own day job. I need to keep this platform running. And so this became really burdensome. And that's why Fedramp was created, because this cloud service provider was going, we're having to go through so many different assessments and getting assessed for all these different, company, could be, agency or organizations. So Fedramp was created to reduce the burden of constant evaluation for CSPs, by evaluating this cloud service provider and their environment once they get that FedRAMP authorization, and now they can give it and say, company one, I've already gone through certification, give that to your auditor, so I don't have to do the assessment with you this time. Company three, here's my certification, you can give that to your auditor, so I don't have to do that again. So I just wanted to highlight that difference, is that when we're talking about CMMC and usually we're talking about these individual companies, highlighted in red, that are going to be undergoing a certification of their environment, what they operate, how they store, process, and transmit CUI, which could include, the box in the cloud, because everybody uses cloud services these days. But that means that they need a customer responsibility matrix from the cloud. They may need an SSP, depending on the kinds of services that are being provided. But when we talk about FedRAMP, we're talking specifically about the cloud service providers and the certification that they're going to get to prove that their service offering is secure. Irregardless of whether or not they have CUI. That's kind of a separate conversation. If they have CUI, then they have to go through CMMC, and they become an OSC on their own. But maybe I'll pause there and say, does that help with that conversation of who needs what type of certification and how CMMC is different from FedRAMP?
Good question.
Yes.
What's a quick classification of CUI? You said that if they don't have CUI, they don't have to do CMMC. What's a big determining factor whether it is CUI or not specifically?
So CUI is,
Controlled.
critical unclassified information. So it's really if you're doing work with the government, they need to tell you if you have CUI. So it's not really up to you to decide whether you have it. There's lots of different types of CUI. Controlled technical information is a category that we see a lot. So it's technical specifications. If you're making, a widget for the government, if you are making something that goes on the landing gear of a fighter jet, if you're making, manufacturing, making specific, software, it's a whole broad, it could be a lot of different things. There are research organizations that are doing work on, textiles for military gear. And all of those different things could be CUI in different contexts. Or even one example that we always throw out is even, like a landscaper might say, I don't have any CUI. Why do I need to care? I'm just trimming the bushes. But if you might have some kind of, maybe it's federal contract information, but you might have something that's sensitive if they say, yes, but you're going to trim these 20 bushes along this perimeter, which is the perimeter of the fort. And you're going to need to know that there's a gate here and there's, an opening here and the grassy area here, but you find out information about the landscape of a military base or something like that in the process that might end up being CUI. So it's really the government is supposed to tell you what type of CUI you have. Unfortunately, they are not great at labeling that or being very clear on that information. So that's something that we're really telling companies, that if you are contracted with the government, if you think you might have CUI, write down what you think you might have, capture that in clearly, and then provide that, work with your government counterpart, your contracting officer, the authorizing official, somebody to confirm your understanding. But it is better to take them something. If you go and say, what do I have that's CUI? They might just say, anything I've ever given you. And we've seen people that have labeled, put a CUI label in their email signature, which is not right. That's a great way to overclassify everything. So it's better to take them something. But I know that, again, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but CUI can be many different types of things, naval nuclear information, controlled unclassified information, technical information, but the government should be working with you to help you figure out what that is specifically.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So back on the FedRAMP side, I know I kind of did that walkthrough to show, when we're talking about CMMC, when we're talking about FedRAMP, but just kind of hammering again or reiterating those specifics on the FedRAMP side of things. The program was built to secure or to protect government data in cloud environments. So that's the key. If you hear FedRAMP, think cloud. Um, and so it was really driving that cloud adoption in federal organizations, standardizing security, creating a uniform requirement of, we know that everybody that is been Fedramp authorized has met these security requirements. And it was really built to streamline, the procurement and the process, because these cloud service providers were having to undergo certification and assessments all the time. They said, can we just do this once and we'll do a really good job, and then you can use that and know and be able to trust us moving forward. So definitely I'd say my takeaway there is focus. If you hear FedRAMP, think cloud. There are different impact levels. I won't go into all the details, but like CMMC has levels based on the type of data you have. FedRAMP also has impact levels and baseline controls. There are, people usually say there are 3 levels, but there is a kind of a tailored LISAS, a low impact software as a service level as well. But there are 3 primary, low, moderate, high, based on the type of data that you have. So that brings in different requirements from that suite of 853 that you would need to meet based on the level that you're looking to achieve. And then there is a whole authorization path for FedRAMP as well. And actually, FedRAMP, if anybody has seen, has been in the news a lot in the last week or two because they are updating their process. In the last few years, they were making it a little bit easier for companies to go through FedRAMP. You used to have an agency sponsor to be able to decide. You couldn't just decide you wanted to go through this process. You needed a government agency to say, I want to use your product and sponsor you to go through this process. And now it's looking like that's there. For a while, you didn't have to have that. Now I think we might be kind of moving back more to needing that agency sponsor. But you have to go through readiness assessment. You need to work through third-party assessment organization to test out what you're doing, have a full security package, and then undergo continuous monitoring to make sure you're keeping your requirements in place and you don't just tear everything down the day after the auditor is there. So kind of side by side here, I wanted to highlight the difference between CMMC and FedRAMP and kind of back towards why are they here and how are they different. CMMC is 110 requirements. If we think about level 2, which is what a lot of people are focused on right now, based on the 800-171 requirements. FedRAMP has 263 requirements taken from 853. They both require you to have a full security package, a way to document and capture what you're doing. You need a system security plan, customer responsibility matrix, supporting policies and procedures. There's different terminology used on the FedRAMP side. You still need an SSP, to have security assessment plans, test results, penetration testing. So there's a lot of documentation involved in both of them. In both cases, you need to get that external organization to perform the certification. On the CMMC side, they're called a C3PAO. For a CMMC or a certified third-party organization on FedRAMP side, they're just called a 3PAO. But then when you get down to the core of it and the point of each program, CMMC is focused on assessing an organization's ability to store, process, and transmit CUI securely, and protecting the confidentiality of that information. On the FedRAMP side, we're assessing that cloud service provider's ability to separate and protect customer data. So we talked about, if we've got a whole bunch of different companies in that cloud service provider's environment, we want to make sure that different customers can't access the same data or each other's data. So FedRAMP the focus is, it's on protecting the data, but it's one of the major things that's built around is ensuring that separation so that different customers can't access each other's data. And that includes review of their build and deployment process for spinning up new customers because they're constantly bringing new customers in. People cancel their contract, they take them out, and there's constant flux there. So they can't necessarily just evaluate, what's in place on Tuesday at 3 p.m. because it's constant flux. So that's part of why we need these security packages defining the processes. We want to make sure they're operating securely and continuously, not that they did it once on Tuesday. So I know that's a lot of information. Yes, I see a question.
Yeah. So the question is, which one has a bigger market? Is it Fedramp or CMMC in terms of market size and the contract size? So I can be an assessor. So I can choose for myself. Shall I be assessor and consultant for Fedramp or assessor and consultant for CMMC? I want to see which one has the highest demand in terms of market and in terms of what do you call it, the contract size. So somebody new to the field can focus on one thing.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So let me give you a few data points on that then. So I think CMMC is or likely a larger market just based on the number of defense contractors out there. There's also been a lot of conversations about expanding this to other agencies across the federal government. There's a lot of ideas out there, but CMMC for defense contractors is the only one that is being codified in law at the moment, and we do expect that to go through. So based on the number of defense contractors, I think that's probably larger than the number of cloud service providers that are going to want to go through Fedramp certification to get authorized there. However, the number that you look at here with the number of requirements being 110 for CMMC and 263 for Fedramp, if you were from like a consulting point of view, going through Fedramp certification process, authorization process is going to be a bigger job. That's going to be more work than going through the CMMC process just based on sheer number of requirements alone. So if you can, I guess there are probably more people looking to get CMMC certified, but if you are working with a company to get FedRAMP authorized, that's going to be a larger project. So maybe different things to weigh there.
Yeah, awesome.
Great. So we are coming into the end of my slides here, but I did want to point you out to a few links and resources that are out there. Here's a few links for more information on CMMC and some of the guidance documentation they have out there, especially specifically on the level 2. Really, if you follow this link at the top for and these two, it will get you to all the information and more that you could want about CMMC and their requirements and their scoping guidance and assessment criteria. And I didn't mean to skip. And all of that. Also, we do have from Optic Cyber Solutions, we have a few resources that we have provided for getting started with CMMC specifically. We've got a CMMC progress tracker, and we work with organizations to fill that out to be able to implement the requirements and track where they are as they implement all of the requirements. And I see a hand, yes.
Do you provide official training for individuals to be CMMC certified assessors?
I do not through my company. We do work with other organizations. We help to write one of the assessors or one of the books for actually for Edwards Performance Solutions. They provide training on becoming a CCP, and we helped them author their book back when they initially developed it. But we don't do the training ourselves. But if you want to shoot me an email, I can provide you a link to the training that they do to become a CCP. Great. And I see another question, Kevin.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Kelly. One question for you is, so with official training, is there stuff that you can look at prior to training to get a little bit of more understanding before you actually would take the official training? Is there
Um,
anything helpful that would be get you just a leg up on the trading part of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there, I mean, I do know that there's a lot of information out on YouTube. Actually, we have a YouTube channel for Optic Cyber that we have put out. We have a series of CMMC related videos and a few on Fedramp also. Um, but I know that there's a lot of people, other people that have also done webinars and trainings. They're usually either, short videos. Most of ours are between 5 and 10 minutes. I know a lot of other people that will do more like 1 hour length content. Um, but most of this like the CCP training are like week long, 40-hour trainings. And I don't know of many that are kind of in between that 1 hour and 40 hour. Most people, if they're going to move, well, there is, I guess, the RP. So there is CMC registered practitioner. Um, there is a series, a training that you can go through. It's so in the CMC program, they have two different kind of paths, the assessor path, and that's where you go, the CCP, and then the CCA, which is for the assessor or the practitioner, and then the assessor. And then they have the RP, which is the registered practitioner, and that's for consultants. So that is a much lower, a lower bar. There is some training involved in that, and there is a test that you have to take in order to get your CMMC RP. So that might be a good path if you don't want to go all the way to the CCP, which is the courses do usually range, and a few $1,000s for the course, and then you have to take the exam and pass that. So that's but the RP is you maybe could look at that as a stepping stone if you wanted to start there. But also, if you want to shoot me an email, I can send you a link to the videos that we have that are, again, they're little short videos, but they might help to provide some context as well.
I did put your YouTube channel on here,
Oh, thank you. Great.
and I also put your LinkedIn, so you guys can follow her on both. All
Wonderful.
right, Caesar, question.
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Um, yeah, so question for you. By the way, valuable information here. I didn't know too much about this topic in particular. I knew it existed. I just didn't know too much about it. And so my question for you is, I work for like basically like a corporate. I do a lot of like, for example, PCI assessments. I use a lot of NIST framework, things like that. Let's say, I've been thinking about trying to do consulting on the side, which I've done in the past, through resources like Upwork, et cetera, things like that. But how does one, kind of step it up as far as, leaving a corporate, working for somebody else and like starting your own consultant business? Is there like maybe any tips that you could give as far as that goes?
That's a good question. I'd say maybe the most important thing is to build your network. And I think by being a part of groups like this, you already start to do that. One of the things that I see a lot of people do, especially if you're looking to do more consulting work on the side, is to be a voice in the community. There's a lot of people that will, be on LinkedIn and maybe you like a post here and there, you check it every now and then. But I've seen a lot of people really start to grow a network and build a community through LinkedIn. And that's one of the things that we try to do to help build our consultancy is to show thought leadership, that you understand the topics, you can share the information you learn when something changes, when something is new, you can share that, and people might start to come to you. So especially if you're looking to build out a client base. And get people to have awareness of the work that you can do, that might be something to consider. And then aside from just going to networking events, finding people in your local community that are interested in the same topics or challenges and being able to talk to them and share the experience that you have. And then they might start to say, well, hey, can you help me? Can you help me get this done? I'm really busy in my day job and I don't have time to do this. So I'd say my number one tip would just be, that networking and getting FaceTime with people and sharing your knowledge, what you know, what you're experienced with, and how you could help them.
Okay, yeah, that awesome advice as far as that goes. Let's say you do have people starting to reach out to you and you're helping out with certain projects. What do you see as a next step? Like, hey, do you start your own, some sort of consulting firm, your own business? You do freelance work? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it kind of depends on where you want to go. I mean, if you are looking to build it out, I'd say, start creating a brand, create a name, maybe get an LLC. I do think it would cost, just a little, a little bit, but by doing that, it creates a way for you to look more official and to start building something, even if it's just little by little. You can operate as a sole proprietor and just do the work on the side. So it kind of depends on if you are if you want to keep it on the side and just do it a little bit here and there, you can do that. But if you want to build it out and build it into something, maybe just taking a leap, creating an LLC, getting a brand, creating a name, build a brand, and start using that and sharing it and communicating with that, might help to kind of get the ball rolling.
Do we
Okay,
need any type of
awesome.
licensing other than the LLC?
I'm sorry?
Do we need any type of permits or licensing other than LLC?
You shouldn't need any types of permits or licensing for the cybersecurity field. I mean, it's always good to, sometimes certifications can be a nice way to easily communicate to others that I have this knowledge. I was able to learn about this topic and pass the examination. But it's not like like an engineering, like a professional engineer, or passing the bar or something like that you would need to have that type of a license.
Okay. So basically just whatever personal certifications you have, LLC, and just start promoting yourself and interacting with other groups.
Yeah, yeah. At least in Maryland. Maybe I'll throw a qualifier out there. I don't know if there are other states that have additional requirements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes we just tend to overthink these things, right? I mean, at some point, we're subject matter experts in certain different fields, and we're pretty confident to do it for a corporation. But when it comes down to doing it for ourselves and building a brand sometimes it seems like we're very, we overthink these things, right? And then we never get anywhere.
That's
Right.
the time.
Right. No, I totally understand that. Sometimes it's easier to just get started, just do something, and then do something new every day. You learn, do a little piece, start building that brand, here and there, and then you'll look up a year later and see everything everywhere you've talked about it or everything you've done, and it'll be surprising. So yeah, I'd say jump in, give it a shot, and good luck.
Thank you for that.
Okay, you have a question?
So, Miss Kelly, I am basically an ISO guy. I can put a label on myself as an ISO guy.
Okay.
So, to draw an analogy in here, especially for international companies. So, to draw an analogy to make it easier for me to understand. So, ISO, it will be like international or sometimes in the US, but I don't see that much demand. Let's say ISO, then the analogy is NIST CSF at a program level. Then you get down a little bit lower, so it's going to be 27,002 as a catalog of controls. Let's say in the US, it's going to be like NIST 853 or NIST 800, 171, depends on the requirements. Then you get certified in ISO. And for the US one, you get certified by CMMC if it is defense, or you get authorized as per Fedramp. But the main control of catalog is 853, and the main framework, which is encompassing all the other stuff, it's going to be like NIST CSF. Is this the right analogy?
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, because right, CSF I look at as very broad. It's a framework. It covers the breadth of cybersecurity topics, and most of the other standards fit within CSF. So things like we look at the 853 catalog that covers the confidentiality, integrity, and availability pieces. It maps into the cybersecurity framework, just bringing that lower level of granularity. When we think about 171, it's a subset of 53 focused on confidentiality. So again, it can map in at that lower level. CMMC is essentially equivalent to 171 again, so it's a subset focused on confidentiality. Fedramp again is back to that 853 level, but yes, so I think all in all, CSF is overarching, broad, outcome-based. Some of these other standards, 853, 171 are control catalogs that are ways or requirements that we need to meet based on these regulatory requirements like CMMC or Fedramp that we would need to get certified in and achieve those to get those certificates. So yes, and all in all.
Yeah, so we can say program level, then controls level, then risk management level. Then we start comparing among all of these things. And some of them might be optional if you go to any other country, and some of them are in the US like mandatory because regulated by laws, so we have to do it. And if you go to private sector as well, if you want to use any one of them, if you want to use NIST as a program, if you want to use ISO, then you integrate under that, like in finance, let's say in the banking or retail, whatever you want to call it, PCI DSS, you put it in there so you can implement something like that as a bigger umbrella.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Good.
Kevin, you got a question?
Yeah, just real quick, I'm just going to ask a different question than what I asked before. So, for the CCP, when you take the exam, you obviously you have your training provider. Is there any other resources that you think that would be beneficial to use, either prep wise, before or after you take the required training?
Yeah, for the CCP specifically, there if you go through a training provider, they should give you a fair number of resources. And one of them actually will be a book that looks like this. So they'll give you an exam book that you can study. I mean, it's, a few pages long. But it goes through everything you would need for the exam. I know a lot of, like, if you're going for like a CISSP or something, you have to purchase the book separately. For this certified CMMC professional, they do, you have to go through a class, and they do provide you a lot of resources. When I went through and took the test, they gave us, I'm trying to remember what all they gave us, all of the slides from the week, so everything we covered. There was practice tests that were included. There was different exercises, like scoping exercises, that were included. Um, so I would say if you're interested in going for your CCP and going to go through a provider, I'd maybe wait to purchase anything until you see what is included with the class, because a lot of times they include a lot of additional materials with the class. But if you're not sure if you want to take the class, then maybe purchasing one of the training books ahead of time to read and just see if you're interested in might be another way to go about it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All righty. We appreciate your time, Miss Kelly. We got a lot of information out of this. I know you got your kids and things to take care of and your business you got going on, like you told us, but there's a lot of information we got here. I know everybody here got a lot of insights. I hope everybody else did in their own way. If you guys want to get into the government sector, obviously this is another option. One last thing for you, Rick, before I let you go. What is the deciding factor for you that allowed you to go into business in the government sector versus like doing like PCI audits or ISO, like Kay was talking about, or NIST, which is more for public companies versus government contractors like you're doing now. Why did you decide specifically to do government over the other ones?
Yeah, actually, well, I actually turned it back around a little bit. We didn't. I do a lot of work with the NIST cybersecurity framework.
Okay.
We really, about half the work we do is for commercial companies. So we've got the history that we have. We've got a background. My co-founder spent a lot of time working for the government and contracting with the government. So he brought a whole lot of experience with Fedramp and, RMF, FISMA, all of those types of things. But we also both of us supported NIST. We're actually still subcontractors to NIST, doing work on the cybersecurity framework team. So I do a lot of work around the cybersecurity framework as well, and that's a lot what we do for the commercial companies. So that's when we get to work with a lot of, retail, maritime, um, utilities, doing cybersecurity framework assessments. We don't really do a lot of ISO or PCI, but really that's just based on experience. I haven't spent as much time with those, and so we tend to focus on cybersecurity framework, CMMC, Fedramp, and that keeps us busy. So we do a little bit of all of those, but it comes and goes. Sometimes one side gets a little more busy, and the other one, as people, ignore the other one for a little bit. So it's nice to have a little bit of diversity among them, I think, and that helps us out from a business perspective. But it is nice to get a little bit of insight on the government side and the commercial side as well to balance out.
Well, all righty then. Well, we appreciate your time, Miss Kelly. Hope anybody else has any other questions. We'll let you go for this evening, and we hope to stay in touch again and having you potentially on again in the near future.
Great. No, thank you all for having me. I enjoyed the conversation. Let me know if you have any other questions. And yeah, it was great to chat with you all. Thanks again.
You guys
Thank you,
follow up.
Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.